3 subtle attitudes that are actually toxic. In this video, I'll go through 3 ideas about autism that kind of sound pretty good when you first hear them. They seem like they'd be okay, but are actually quite toxic if left unchecked. Hi everyone, Paul Mikolev here from Autism from the Inside. I make weekly videos sharing the human side of autism, so make sure you hit subscribe to get the latest content. So there are some ideas about autism that are obviously problematic, like anything painting autism as a disease or as something to be cured, or that shames autistic behavior and promotes conformity at all cost. That kind of stuff is probably going to be on your radar. You're probably going to notice if someone has a negative view of autism. There are some other ideas though that sound kind of positive at first glance, but if you dig a little deeper as to the underlying beliefs that it implies, it can be just as problematic, preventing us from accepting autism and autistic culture in general. So what are the 3 ideas? I'll share all 3 in a minute and just notice if you feel yourself instantly agreeing or disagreeing with any of these statements. Number 1. We should help autistic people with social skills. Number 2, everyone needs to do things they don't like every once in a while. And number 3, you should be considerate of others, and it's selfish to put your needs ahead of others, especially in a group. So I'll be interested to hear in the comments your initial reaction to those 3 statements. But before we go into detail as to how each of these statements presents some pretty serious problems, I just want to be clear, especially if you're feeling particularly defensive towards one of these statements that you really like. It's not the statement itself that's a problem. It's that these statements sometimes hide negative underlying beliefs, and it's those underlying beliefs that are toxic. If that doesn't make any sense, it will very soon. Okay, attitude number 1. We need to help autistic people to learn social skills. This one is so close to being really good because if implemented in a good way, then that would actually be really helpful. How helpful would it be if everyone was actually taught social skills and I didn't have to guess and I knew everyone around me had the same information and we actually had a handbook of this is what you're supposed to do in culture and not supposed to do, and everyone was on the same page, and it would just clear up a lot of the really confusing things that a lot of us find really difficult to deal with. The toxic, often unchecked assumption here is that neuronormative social skills are the best way to interact with other people. And what that means is if someone is not providing the socially prescribed amount of eye contact in the correct way at the correct time, then that person has a problem and that person needs to be taught how to do these things in the same way everyone else does. Ultimately, the real answer to the question of why do I need to look someone in the eye? Why do I need to make small talk? Why do I need to socialize in groups as opposed to one-on-one or small groups? Or why do I need to use verbal communication? The answer to all of these questions is, well, social reasons, cultural reasons, because that's what everyone else does and that's what's expected, essentially. So just because that's the way that my culture is set up does not necessarily mean it's the best way or it's the only way. So what would be better than teaching the incompetent, broken, autistic person how to do social skills like everyone else would be to also focus not only on helping the individual understand on their terms, but focus on relaxing some of those social norms. Maybe I don't always need to look you in the eye. Maybe I don't always need to use verbal communication. And this is closer to what you find when groups of autistic people come together and create their own culture. We tend to focus on what works, and if it works and everyone's happy, then it's okay. We often implement things like you can take a break at any time, you can zone out anytime, you can be on your phone at the dinner table and it's going to be okay because I know you're participating and I know you want to be around us. If you want to opt in for a little bit and then take a break and opt out, that's completely fine. All forms of communication are valid. You don't always need to use your mouth words every time you want to say something. If it's obvious that you're stressed, or obvious that you need a break, or obvious that you want something, then I'm going to listen to however you are currently communicating that, so that I take on some of the communication burden of responsibility rather than putting it all on the other person to communicate properly. I also want to challenge the assumption that autistic people have a deficit in social skills at all. In fact, there are many situations where I've seen autistic people consistently outperform neurotypical peers. The first two that come to mind is, number one, understanding other autistic people and what they want and need and how they communicate. And number two is anything to do with cross-cultural communication. I feel so out of place in my own culture that when I go to another culture, it's more or less the same and my strategies always work. It means I'm more likely to go into a situation and say, hey everyone, how do you do things around here? And help me to understand that so that I can fit in here. Rather than, well, I already know the best way to do it, and if you aren't doing that, then there must be a problem with you because I know the best way. I remember there was a television program for young kids in Australia called Play School, and they had a song that went something along the lines of, where you can come over to my house, but you have to do what we do. And they would have all of these little scenarios of teddy bears and dolls and things going over to each other's houses and singing that song and saying, oh, what do you do at your house? Oh, you do this, and let's do it together. And it was a fun little way to emphasize that when you're in someone else's culture, you take your cues from the people around you as to what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And I found that autistic people are often much better at doing that because we don't have this overarching sense of this is the one right way to do something. This gets us in trouble with large groups of neurotypical peers who are all in vehement agreement that yes, there is only one right way of doing things around here, but it can actually be a positive thing in other circumstances. So potentially toxic attitude number one, we need to teach autistic people social skills. Actually, what we need to do as well as that is relax some of our stricter social requirements so that we can make spaces accessible to all people, so that we can create a society that's accessible for everyone without requiring everyone to conform in a neurotypical way. Potentially toxic attitude number two, we all have to do things we don't like from time to time. Now, at first glance, yes, of course, that's true. If I only ever did things that I liked to do, I wouldn't get very far in life at all. It's the way that this phrase is used and when it's used that can make it problematic. It's almost a version, like a cousin, of isn't everyone just a little bit autistic? It diminishes what you find hard to do and puts it in the category of, yeah, everyone finds some things difficult. We all need to do some things in life that we find difficult. And when you have a serious need for something, then that is completely invalidating of your genuine need. Some examples might be sensory sensitivities or social anxiety. Oh yeah, we all get socially anxious when we meet a new group of people. No, if you have social anxiety, it's a completely new level on top of that. It's not just the normal anxiety that everyone feels when public speaking or when going to meet someone for the first time or try something new. That is normal, that is correct. However, if you have something like social anxiety, then your ability to cope in those situations, your reaction to those situations is not just like everyone else's, it's next level. And so saying something like we all have to do things we don't like from time to time is the opposite of helpful. I got this a lot when I was first trying to start my own business. I was absolutely drowning in admin and there were so many different tasks I needed to learn how to do, and I was the only person who could do them and I had to do absolutely everything. And that's completely normal when you start a business by yourself, completely normal. But for me, I was really drowning in all of that. The degree of difficulty for me to push through a task I'm clearly really not very good at is probably 10 times as much as your average person. It should not take half an hour of stress and anxiety to respond to an email with something like, okay, that sounds good, how about we meet on Tuesday, right? I desperately needed help And when I told people, the response that I got was, we all need to go through things that we don't like from time to time. Everyone in your position goes through that. One day when you're established enough, you'll be able to afford to pay someone to do that admin for you. Not very helpful, completely invalidating, and it actually prevents us from asking for help when we genuinely need it, just because what we're asking for help for is a little bit uncomfortable for everyone. If someone's in a wheelchair and says, I can't use the stairs, do you have another option? You don't say, oh yeah, I hate the stairs too, aren't they so annoying? No, completely different level. So when someone says we all have to do things we don't like from time to time, be careful that they're not taking your genuine need and dismissing it as a trivial one. Okay, number 3. This one is a really big one in terms of forming your own self-confidence and identity. And as I come across in my coaching work all the time, it's actually a key reason why people have trouble in intimate relationships too. Essentially, the concept is that you should be considerate of other people and it's selfish to put your needs first. Now, I deliberately broke this up into 2 because the first part, nothing wrong with that. It's good to be considerate. It's always good to consider what are the effect of my actions on the people around me. Great. The subtle problem with this is that it implies that I should put someone else's needs above my own needs. Now, to see why this doesn't really work, let's take the example of a couple. They are in an intimate relationship. Whose needs should be put first? Any ideas? It's easier to come up with a wrong answer, and the wrong answer is either one. So if I were in a relationship and I said my needs should always come first, problematic. Right? Now, if my partner said the same thing and wanted her needs to always come first, again, problematic. So in that case, if I am saying my needs should always come second, that is equally problematic because I'm putting other people's needs ahead of what I need. Now, it just so happens that the vast majority of neurotypical people are inherently selfish. They tend to overemphasize their own needs at the expense of everyone else. That is just how most people in the population tend to be. Which means for most people in the population, it's a really good reminder to don't be selfish, don't always put your needs ahead of everyone else's. Unfortunately, socially, how this plays out is if I'm in a group and I have a problem, I have a real need in that situation, and no one else has this problem, then it is seen as rude or selfish socially to take up the group's time and attention in solving my problem. If I'm the only one who has problem with the background noise, or I'm the only one who needs to stand up when everyone can sit down, or I'm the only one who's too cold, or I'm the only one who can't touch the hand sanitizer because they've put all this perfume in it and it smells disgusting, whatever it is, this concept is often translated to it's rude and socially unacceptable to put your own needs ahead of the group. The result here is if I often experience the fact that I need something that no one else in my group needs, it means that I am chronically going to, in virtually every situation, not feel like I have the right to advocate for myself, to ask for what I need, or more importantly, to expect that it's okay for me to inconvenience people sometimes to get what I need in a situation. So ultimately, if it's rude and selfish and socially inappropriate to inconvenience people, what that means is that the environment, the social environment, is inaccessible to me. I wear earplugs in public spaces. I take a little bouncy ball with me when I go and listen to a public talk or something, and I will stand up the back and pace up and down and throw this from one hand to the other or other things that don't really bother anyone else, and that's how I can be in the space. I need these things to make the spaces accessible for me to participate. So what that means is if it's not okay for me to stim in public because the people around me think that's weird and start feeling uncomfortable, and now I'm inconveniencing everyone else by this weird, uncomfortable behavior, which is obviously rude and selfish to do that, then what that means is the space is not accessible for me and I can't participate in it. That's problematic. So what, I'm expected to leave the space if I need to self-regulate? I can go to a separate sensory room away from everyone else where I can't bother anyone, and that's socially appropriate. Look at us, how autism inclusive we are. We have a sensory room. But if I can't be in the space with everyone else, then that space is inaccessible. I'm not included, I'm excluded. I'm literally exiled to the sensory room until I want to come back into the inaccessible space. So when someone says it's important for you to be considerate, the flip side of that, to make sure you remember, is that you have every right to ask other people to be considerate of you, even if there's more of the other people than there are of you. And as I mentioned before, I find in my life coaching work that a lot of autistic adults, I would say most, if not all autistic adults, have this belief kind of drilled into us that we are not allowed to ask for our own needs. Some people have the opposite, and they end up seeming to the world to be incredibly selfish and self-centered and inflexible, right? And we get criticized for being inflexible when we say, no, I definitely need this. No questions asked. That's the end of the story. My needs matter in this situation. And that is the other side of the same coin of a failure to recognize that me being considerate implies that I should also expect other people to be considerate of me. This is a massive problem in maintaining relationships, especially intimate relationships, because when we don't stand up for our own needs and when we are not considerate of others and also expect others to be considerate of us, then it ends up being a one-way relationship and we are accused of not having appropriate social skills. I feel like there are probably more subtly toxic attitudes and beliefs if we actually took the time to have a think about them. But I'll probably leave it there for today in terms of these three. If you have any other subtly toxic beliefs that come to mind, let me know in the comments. Maybe I can do a separate video on them. Otherwise, I'm really curious to hear how your opinion and beliefs around these attitudes has changed from the start of the video when I shared all three of them with you until now. So please leave a comment if you can. Otherwise, thanks for watching and I'll see you again next week.